they develop better on this food. So there are just much more efficient ways to use the resources that even the smallest of countries has. They said I heard this tape, and there was this anecdote where back in the in Prohibition, the way they would figure out who had stills in their backyard and was making alcohol was they would go to these fairs and look at the cows, and the ones with the fattest cows had the stills because they were feeding the cows the remains after the corn had been through the distillery process and had the indigestible parts, had been used in another way.
I noticed you quoted David Bloom also in your article.
Yeah, that one.
Yes. Wow. What is a debt canceling bond? And why did you mention it in the article? I don't think most people, in principle, you can understand what it is, but how does it work and why is it being used?
In Argentina, when the currency collapsed totally twice, in 1995 and again in, I think, 2000 or 2001. And so municipal governments had these obligations to their workers, and they had literally no currency, nothing to pay them with. And so what they did was they issued these little bonds, or IOUs, promises to pay, and essentially it was like the IOUs that California tried to issue, except that the banks wouldn't honor them. But in this case, the banks would honor them, and it worked. They paid the workers just in little IOUs that basically meant, when we have the money, we'll pay you, but in the meantime, you can use this for a currency. And they did. They traded it. The banks honored them, and they traded them in the community, and that was a supplemental source of money.
Why do you think it is that Argentina, for example, is remembered as the country that collapsed and went into nothingness, but a great deal of the public doesn't remember that Argentina came back? Why do you think the memory is still with the fall of Argentina and not with the rise?
The mass media are controlled by 6 corporations the last time I looked, and these are all the banking corporation. They are a cartel, and so they've pretty much shaped all the information that we get. So the story we've gotten is not the real story at all. That's why I wrote this book, Web of Debt. When I realized that myself, it was just such an eye-opener, and it threw a different light on all of history. And so I wound up going country by country and just looking at what had really happened and what we had been told happened and what really was going on. So yeah, much of history we're not told, or it's there. You can find it on the internet, but you're not going to find it on your local news, probably.
So what would you recommend now to Iceland, which is in very delicate shape, really delicate shape right now?
Well, I was trying to just report, but it looks to me like there's a good chance that they will not join the EU, or that they're certainly protesting joining the EU, and they should at least hold out for better terms. One issue is whether, or perhaps that was Latvia, I guess, there's an issue whether to devalue their currency, and I can't really speak to that. I read about it, and some experts whom I credit say yes and some say no, so I don't know. It seems to me the risk of devaluing your currency is that it will now float, which means speculators can come in and devalue it, which is certainly what will happen. It always does happen. That's what happened to Mexico. That's what happened to all these countries, that as soon as they let their currency float.
Explain what that is to the public, too.
Okay. When we were on a gold standard, exchange rates were fixed. It was the Bretton Woods Agreement. The exchange rates could just vary like a small percentage, and so they were pretty much fixed relative to other currencies. So when you went into Mexico, your peso was going to be worth the same number of dollars, or your dollars were going to be worth the same number of pesos at any 1 year after the next. But then when we went off the gold standard, then currencies became like commodities. They traded against each other. So,
do you approve of that, by the way?
No,
I think it's a form of economic terrorism to speculate on currencies, because you can break down entire countries doing this.
You can, and that has definitely happened. George Soros did it just to make a point. I mean, that's the way he tells the story later, but he virtually brought down England, which is, that's not a
The
small
Bank of
country.
England, right?
That's a power.
Yeah.
So just by short selling, which to my mind, everybody says, oh, short selling's all right. It's naked short selling that's illegal. But I think even short selling should not be allowed. Why should you be allowed to sell something that you don't own just to make a profit? You can only do it because we're talking about numbers on a screen. If you were talking about lawnmowers, you can't go sell, a lawnmower that you don't have.
But it's also using the paradigm of leverage to do it. It's all about using leverage to do it. You only take you only pay a small percentage, even though you're taking possession of something much larger. You can get in the game with a smaller amount of money, but you can wreak havoc with it too.
Yeah, and yeah, I know what you mean. I can't think of the word.
How do you explain short selling to the public? I really want the public to understand what short selling is and naked short selling is.
Short selling is where you sell stock, for instance, and use the stock market because that's the easiest to understand.
Great.
Everybody knows the stock market, and you can go in and you just say, I want to sell 1,000 shares of such and such, but you don't own the 1,000 shares. You have to cover later. So there's a time when the thing is due, and then you have to find the shares. And the idea is you're assuming that the stock is going down. And so if you sell it at whatever 30, and then the stock goes down more, you can buy it back at 20, and then you get to keep the $10 difference between what you sold it at and what you bought it back at, and replaced the stock that you sold.
Is there a central depository or some type of recording apparatus where people can go and look at where the short sales are?
They're all kept track of by something called the DCC, I think it is.
The DCC?
I think that's the...
It would be very interesting to look at the short selling of all of major events in the world that were either emergency events or traumatic events, or any type of negative or terribly bad, like negative events that have happened in the world.
Mm-hmm. Notoriously, there was heavy short selling of the two airlines that went down in 9/11 before it happened. So somebody knew that it was going to happen.
See, that's why I think speculation needs to go, because what you can do is you can bankrupt industries and companies and throw hundreds of millions of people out of jobs.
Yeah, and there was heavy naked short selling before Bear Stearns went down. There was more short selling than there were shares outstanding. In other words, these can't have been legal.
See, that to me is working at cross purposes to being able to have a company. It has nothing to do with what people are doing in the company. It has nothing to do with the way a company's being stewarded. It's literally a defilement of being in business.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
Who do you think it is that manages the laws, or how did short selling come into being? Do you know?
I just remember the name is DTCC.
DTCC. I wonder what that is.
And of course, it's owned by banks. The laws have all been, they're all in favor of the banks because the banks control Congress, and they control Congress because they have the power of the purse. They create our money, and so every congressman is beholden to them, and we know that even our president, one of his biggest backers was Goldman Sachs. So they have to dance to the tune of the people who put them in power. So the only way we're ever going to control that is to take back the power to create money. So that's why I think, to me, the most direct way to do that is to set up a competing banking system. I mean, we'll just play by their rules. There's no way we're going to get legislation passed that says, okay, you guys are all cheating, and so you have to go away, and we're
right. It has to do with setting up a parallel system.
Play by their own rules,